Russia, Iran, and China have so far talked the talk, but they are very far from walking the walk. All three have expressed severe condemnations of Israel, but they don't see themselves as necessarily equipped or desiring of entering the fray in the Middle East.
Hello and welcome to The Focus. I'm Dr. John Bruni. In the wake of Israel's unprecedented strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities, the Middle East stands at yet another precipice. The rhetoric is escalating, the stakes existential. And at the heart of all this lies a deeper question. What drives the Islamic Republic of Iran? Is it a rational state actor pursuing power and deterrence, or a theocratic regime willing to risk annihilation? To help us understand this volatile moment, I'm joined by returning guest Dr. Ori Goldberg, a specialist in the ideological and religious dimensions of the Iranian regime. Ori Goldberg is an Israeli political analyst and former university professor whose work focuses on the intersection of religion and politics in the Middle East. He has written extensively on Iran, Israel, and the ideological forces shaping the region. Ori has long argued that to grasp the logic of Iran's leadership, we must stop projecting Western assumptions onto a deeply religious regime and start listening to what its leaders actually say and believe. Let's dive in. Ori, welcome back to The Focus.
Thank you very much for having me, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
Ori, Israel's strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities and the IRCG were clearly bold and unprecedented. But is there a clear long-term strategy behind them, or has Netanyahu gambled everything on a short-term military gain that could provoke a wider regional war or the chaotic state collapse of Iran?
I'm afraid that I'm going to have to go with option two. There doesn't seem to be a clear end game. All sorts of goals for this war with Iran have been floated by Netanyahu and by others, but nothing manages to stick or cohere into a single vision. Initially, official Israel spoke about going into this war in order to halt or even terminate the Iranian nuclear program, but it became quite obvious that that was not possible without the bunker busting bombs the United States can offer Israel. Um, but even if the United States does offer those bombs, it's still not clear that Israel can do that to the nuclear program. Now Israel is talking very openly about regime change. And I think just last night, our prime minister, in an interview he gave to possibly Fox News, he doesn't do interviews for the Israeli media, or maybe it was CNN, he was asked about his intention to assassinate Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and the rumor is that he suggested that Israel do this, and President Trump vetoed the whole thing. And our prime minister looked into the camera and said, "I'm not going to go into detail," which, as far as he is concerned, amounts to a confirmation. So Israel is on a spree of assassinations, which is an Israeli modus operandi in long standing. Israel has done this in Gaza, it's done this in Yemen, it's done this in Lebanon. The only place where it may have worked to some extent is Lebanon. In other places, it simply exacerbates and worsens Israel's security situation. So I don't think there is an end game. I don't think regime change is a viable plan. I think Israel is doing what it has been doing ever since it invaded Gaza about 2 months after October 7th, 23. Israel is trying to make sure, as much as it can, that it is allowed to do whatever it wants with total impunity, that it is allowed to fire and kill whoever it wants, wherever it wants, for as long a duration as it wants, without having to pay any kind of price for its behavior. That is how Israel now defines security. And I'm afraid that this isn't really about Netanyahu. This is now a very, very broad consensus. Netanyahu enjoys wide popular support in Israel for this war with Iran. It's seen as a moment of deliverance. And perhaps, and just to add a final point, I think Netanyahu most definitely went for broke, as the Americans say, because he wanted to rally the world around Israel. And the reason he wanted to rally the world around Israel is because he was patently aware of the fact that Israel had come to the end of its rope in Gaza. He had no more options in Gaza. He couldn't destroy Hamas. He couldn't return the hostages. He wanted to regain the world's support. Iran is still a pain in the side of the leading powers of the global north. And that's what he was counting on. I don't know if this will actually happen.
Okay, Ori, here's one out of left field. Is Trump the right president under which, this sort of operation can be conducted? I mean, would we have seen something similar had Kamala Harris become president of the United States, for instance?
I think that's a very good question. And the answer is a kind of a yes and no.
Mm,
Trump is the right president because this is an operation that is full of despair and spur of the moment timing with the hope of leveraging a very, very dynamic environment.
mm,
I don't think Trump necessarily approved this strike on Iran. I think Trump told Netanyahu that he can go forward and do it, and that he, Trump, would wait on the sidelines and capitalize or leverage the strike in direct relation to how it turned out. Would Kamala Harris have supported this strike? But quite possibly, by the way. Iran is a broad consensus in the quote unquote West as well.
yeah.
And it stands to reason that she very well might have, because the security establishment in Washington, D.C., including the democratic elements of it, are very much, let's call it, they don't like Iran very much. Americans have long memories, and they remember Desert Eagle and
Yeah.
the embassy crisis at the beginning of the Islamic Revolution. And they're also well aware of Iranian calls for the death of the great Satan. But it was Trump who initiated negotiations with the Iranians weeks ago.
Mm,
It was Trump who called for a deal as quickly as possible. And he's still calling for a deal, by the way. So this inserts an element of chaos into the entire situation, where an escalation might be an armed one. That is, if the United States enters the fray by deploying strategic bombers or supplying Israel with those bunker busting bombs. But it may also say something else about the possibility of a diplomatic breakthrough. And should a diplomatic breakthrough occur, that would be a very, very major event.
In what sense do you see that as a major event were to come to pass? I mean, sure, the balance of power will have changed in the Middle East quite significantly. I heard somewhere on the wires that perhaps, just perhaps, Israel will become the imperial hegemon of the Middle East because no one would be able to touch it. It would have broken the back of Iran. The Arab states that were already starting to reach out toward Israel will probably find their way back into their comfortable little boxes and think that the Israelis have got their back and they'll be okay. But what about the rest of the region, and how will this balance of power work out?
Well, here's exactly where the Trump effect, I think, is apparent in the fullest way. It can definitely go that way. I mean, if
Mm,
Trump really places the entire might of the United States behind Israel, and he must,
mm,
Israel can't do this on its own. Israel did not demolish and annihilate Gaza on its own. It did so with the help of with the help of American bombs. Apologies.
mm,
So if
mm,
Trump does choose to do that, Israel can become a hegemon. But if Trump doesn't choose to do that, and it stands to reason that he very well might not make that choice, he's already under severe criticism from the right wing of the MAGA movement, the
mm,
people who don't want a war. His base certainly doesn't want a war, and he promised there would be no wars, that he would take America and make it function internally, and that this would be the first item on his agenda. And also, I think he himself wants to be known as a deal maker. That is his legacy, not as the general president. Not, I don't think he prides himself on his ability to lead troops into battle. And if
mm.
that happens, if the United States does actively begin to, at least some extent, distance itself from Israel, that might prove a very reliable cue for the rest of the world, and certainly for the rest of the Middle East, because I think you put it very correctly just a moment ago. Israel is feared. Nobody
Yes.
wants to cooperate with Israel. Nobody trusts Israel. Israel is feared. Fear works as a foundation even for a hegemony, but it only works until the moment where it stops working. And when
Yeah.
it stops working, it collapses almost immediately. So if Israel was to put its trust in it in fear, I doubt that this would be sustainable in anything but the shortest term.
Okay, so I mean, you've said a lot of things there. Let's see if I can drill down into one aspect of that, and that is again we have to. I mean, the Trump factor here seems to be the biggest elephant in the room. We don't know what direction he'll be going into, which comes down to that very oft quoted thing: his unpredictability is his greatest strength. Strategic ambiguity with allies and with foes is his modus operandi, shall we say. I don't know whether or not it's going to be a case of that benefiting the American people in the long term. But who is actually, who's the tail wagging the dog here? I mean, I was initially under the impression that if you looked at Netanyahu and the way that he runs Israel, he's very, oh, he's a hard man. He's a very hard man. And a difficult one to sort of push to one side because I think that he really does dot the i's and cross the t's wherever he goes, which suggests quite strongly about his survival. His political survival is quite amazing. I think someone will have to write a book about Bibi when everything is all said and done. But nonetheless, when you look at Trump, he's a different kind of leader. He's got that moniker now, Taco. Trump always chickens out. Um, do you think that Netanyahu is playing Trump to a degree? Do you think that he senses there's sort of weakness in Washington with Trump and he can draw America into his drama in the Middle East?
I think that there's a real difference between Trump's first administration and his second administration. I think that during Trump's first administration, Netanyahu very much played him, or very much was, the ventriloquist behind the puppet.
Mm, mm,
But the thing is, Trump didn't like it.
yeah.
And Trump didn't like the mockery that was directed at him because Netanyahu appeared to be controlling him. You remember
Hmm.
the mini scandal about the New York Times cartoon showing Netanyahu walking Trump on a leash. Trump doesn't trust Netanyahu, and he doesn't like
Yeah.
Netanyahu. He doesn't like to appear weak.
Mm,
And as regarding what you said about Netanyahu in Israel, yes, he is a survivor. Yes, he's a very wily politician. But I would say that the reason he managed to survive for so long is that despite protests from many Israelis, Netanyahu represents perhaps the quintessential Israeliness. Netanyahu is precisely the man who can talk about Israel as a liberal powerhouse and then carry out a genocidal campaign for 2 years. This
yeah.
basic contradiction that runs through the heart of the Israeli identity, this notion that we are a part of the liberal, enlightened West, and we share values with that West, and that is what guides us, that is what motivates us. That is on the one hand, but on the other, when we have a problem, when we've got an issue, we do what has to be done when it has to be done. Okay?
Yeah.
We don't play around. If
Mm.
we need to carry out a genocide, we'll carry out a genocide. If we need to drive home the point, if we need to teach them a lesson, then we will teach them a lesson.
Mm.
Netanyahu, in that sense, is the quintessential Israeli, and I don't think it's a surprise that Israelis vote for him. The
Yeah.
notions that Israel has a discernible left, they've been discredited for some time now.
Mm.
But Israel also doesn't have a national right-wing movement. We've got our settlers who are akin to the American evangelicals, but Trump in his second term is much less beholden to the evangelicals than he was in 2016.
Mm.
They are not the ones who delivered his victory. He delivered his victory. So things are different. And I don't think Netanyahu is playing Trump, that's for sure, even though he's
Mm.
trying. He had a
Mm.
recorded statement a few days ago where he actually said, "Long live America" on screen, which
Mm.
really came out as remarkably pathetic. I don't know that Trump is interested in playing Netanyahu around. Trump is interested in winning.
Mm.
And Trump is willing to extend Netanyahu the possibility of doing Whatever, as long as it's clear that Trump is allowed to leverage the successful results of what Netanyahu does for his own interests.
Yeah.
And if Netanyahu fails, Trump will cut him off without a second thought.
Well, okay. Well, if you do you believe that Netanyahu can claim redemption or vindication if this operation delays or destroys Iran's nuclear ambitions? Or is this narrative of preventing a nuclear holocaust more about domestic political survival than regional security?
Oh, I have no doubt that the narrative of preventing a nuclear holocaust is about domestic politics.
Mm,
It's not at all about an imminent threat. If this was an imminent threat, I mean, this strike obviously was planned for months, if not years.
yeah.
So it's everything but a preventive strike. It's
Mm,
premeditated in the extreme. And it's not a secret or a surprise why this is happening now. Again, Israel has absolutely no options in Gaza, even when it let aid in with what's called the GFH, the
mm.
GHF centers,
GHF. Yeah. Yeah.
the food delivery centers, which turned into concentration corrals, and where the
Mm,
Israeli military has been killing dozens of Palestinians on a daily basis. The world saw all of that. The world became painfully aware, as far as Israel was concerned, that the extent of Israel's actions and the scope of Israel's potential threat to not just the regional order, but potentially the global order. And I think the world was ready to shift momentum radically. And I'm pretty sure Netanyahu saw that coming, and that is the reason for the strike on Iran. In that
mm.
sense, this was not, I don't know if it was beneficial for Trump, but he wasn't averse to it. You know, he was willing
Yeah.
to see what might happen. But I don't think Trump helped plan this strike. I don't think the United States played an active role in this strike.
Mm,
So I think what we're seeing is, again, a desperate gamble from Netanyahu. But what he's gambling on is that he can get the world to forget Gaza and to realign behind Israel, which is why he has absolutely no shame about using tropes like the Holocaust or divine
mm,
promises or biblical narratives, or call it what you will.
mm.
That's why he's doing it, and that is his jackpot, getting the world behind Israel much, much more than vanquishing Iran or terminating a particular threat.
Okay, so Ori, could this missile war escalate beyond what the Israeli security establishment has planned for? And when we talk about escalation, what exactly would that mean? Because what we're seeing at the moment is that, the Israelis have torn a chunk out of the IRCG, both at a command level, probably also at the operational and tactical level as well. And I'm just wondering what else do the Iranians have for conducting long range strikes? Because I would imagine that much of the Iranian security apparatus have been so thoroughly penetrated that very little would be escaping, the IDF's reach right now, right?
I think you're right. I think it's pretty well known that Iranian security services have been thoroughly penetrated by Mossad and by Israel. I take you back to the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh when he came
Yeah,
to Iran. And generally, there's every reason to assume that Israel is operating drone plants inside Iran, and it is capable of deploying those drones inside Iran, that it has numerous people working for it in various capacities throughout Iran's security services. But the
mm,
Islamic Republic is not limited to security services. Its political leadership is still very much intact. Israel has been going after the military and after the Revolutionary Guard Corps, as you say. So its political leadership is very much there. And if in the beginning you might have heard Iranians celebrating Israel's attacks
yeah,
against the Islamic Republic, as time continues to pass, and Israel not continues not just to attack, but to attack in the middle of civilian neighborhoods and to exact a massive toll in civilian casualties, Iranians are rallying around the flag, and it's the Islamic
mm,
Republic who's holding the flag, not anybody else. The Iranians don't like the Islamic Republic, but the Iranians are very, very sensitive to the notion that someone might impose on them some sort of foreign order or foreign agenda. And Netanyahu's call to the Iranian people to rise up in rebellion is, again, either pathetic in its display of not understanding the Iranian collective psyche, or just a cynical manipulation that's meant to glean as much legitimacy as he can for Israel from the international community at the moment.
You know, that says a lot about where we may be, say, a few months down the track, because if, for instance, the rally around the flag idea starts getting traction in Iran, the notion that perhaps the Ayatollahs, if they're still in charge, soften, moderate their position, maybe even reach out to Israel in some sort of bizarre rapprochement, which we can't contemplate right now. I mean, that's out the window. I mean, it's you're literally dooming a generation or two after this war to continue being anti-Israeli moving forward. It doesn't matter under what condition, because even if they elected a semi-liberal, semi-autocratic nationalist from the military with no ties to the Ayatollahs, the idea that Iran would be at peace with their their position of being put under by the Israelis is just not there, I don't think, from what I understand.
I, I agree. The Islamic Republic hasn't lasted nearly 50 years in power because it's incapable of holding down a country, not just through threats. This isn't North Korea.
Mm,
Threats or brainwashing. Islamic Republic operates a very smart governing apparatus. It's a dictatorship. It's a tyrannical dictatorship, an
mm,
oppressive dictatorship, but it is a functional dictatorship.
yeah.
And the message that Israel is attacking Iran and not the Islamic Republic is ringing loud and clear throughout the country at the moment.
Mm.
And absolutely, even if the Islamic Republic were to be toppled, which again, I think there's a very small chance of that happening, then any leader who would be elected would necessarily, almost by definition, be averse to um, allying himself with Israel in any shape, way, or form.
Mm. So, from a moral and strategic standpoint, Ari, can Israel justify preemptive attacks on Iranian territory as preventative self-defense, or does this set a dangerous precedent in international law and regional deterrence frameworks?
Again, I don't think anybody's buying the preventive strike argument. It's an attempt, a desperate attempt to nail down some legitimacy that I think is failing or has already failed. No, it is a dangerous precedent. I think, again, if I was to extrapolate broadly, I would say that this is very much in line with the history of the colonialist West, the imperialist West. This is what you do. You claim to be operating according to an order of laws, but immediately and simultaneously you claim your own transcendence with regard to those laws. Those laws don't apply to you.
Yeah.
That's what Israel is doing at the moment.
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, were I the leadership of the Western world, were I a participant in the G7 summit, I would look at what Israel is doing and most definitely consider this a threat. You
Mm.
know, this has a very destabilizing effect on the world order. When Netanyahu talks about the assassination of Iran's supreme leader,
Mm.
it's a wonder to me that he doesn't sense he's talking about his own potential assassination at some point.
You raise an excellent point here, because of course, you know, it's not all about Israel and Israeli superiority. I think that we get so carried away with the headlines, we tend to forget that the IRCG also have embedded spies and agents operating throughout the Middle East, I would assume, including within Israel. Now, how competent they are, how quick they can respond to various crises, or how quick they can actually do anything to defend Iran is a totally different question. But I think that it is true that they have got their network that could be activated. But while we're watching all the fireworks happening over Tehran, for instance, we're kind of not paying attention to that shadow threat that may be out there and could pose some significant harm to Israel's political elite.
I think that's certainly a possibility. I don't know if the Iranians are capable of mounting a widespread campaign of terrorism or a direct threat to Israeli supremacy. And actually, were I an Iranian senior leader, I would place much of my resources in pursuing my case through recognized international institutions. What
Mm,
Israel is doing is illegal.
yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
It's not criminal at the level of what Israel is doing in Gaza, but it is very clearly, very overtly illegal according to just about every international law that guarantees the sovereignty of states. And Iran is a sovereign state, like it or not. If you listen to Israeli discourse, all you hear are things like, well, they deserve it. They're a dictatorship. We are ridding the world of a dictatorship. These are our Judeo Christian morals that we share with the enlightened West. They should be grateful to us because we're fighting the good fight. That's not actually true. You know, Israel is positioning itself in direct conflict with an international rules-based order. You can say a lot of things about the state of that order, but that order still exists and is still obligatory to states like Israel who like to think of themselves as a part of it. And Israel is doing everything it can to distance itself from it.
You know, Ori, with more than 70% of all Iranians allegedly opposed to the clerical regime, for our audience, can you explain why there's been no sustained movement capable of toppling that regime? I mean, what structural or psychological barriers continue to insulate the ruling elite of the Ayatollahs from public sentiment in Iran?
Numbers that detail specifically how many people oppose the regime are suspect to begin with, but let's assume it is 70%. First of
Mm,
all, that 70% is a spectrum. Not all of them are militantly opposed to the regime. Most of them just
mm,
don't approve of it or don't like it or would
right.
prefer to live under a less oppressive dictatorship because Iran has never been democratic. It's also an important point to remember. And I would say that there are two main reasons for um, the viability of the Islamic Republic. The first has to do with, again, a consensus shared among all Iranians and a consensus that is more than 200 years old against any kind of foreign influence or foreign involvement that imposes a political or a legal reality on Iranians. Iranians are very much fearful of foreign attempts to control their lives. Historically, this bad blood is between Iran and Russia on one side and the United
Mm,
Kingdom on the other. But broadly speaking, if there's one thing Iranians unite against, it's any attempt to exert foreign influence on their agendas. And the second is that Iran actually has a proud tradition of popular revolutions.
mm,
There were four such revolutions between 1892 and 1979. The 1979 revolution was not seen as an Islamic one by most Iranians because the Islamic Republic was created only after several months of chaos with the departure of the Shah. But the thing is, these popular revolutions are coalition revolutions. They demand a coming together of the various factions and interests within Iranian society to do away with a particularly tyrannical ruler. So
mm,
far, the Iranian opposition, as powerful in numbers as it may be, has not been able to create such a coalition. Part of it has to do with the Islamic Republic being, again, like I said, a functional dictatorship that's very much aware of public sentiments and does its best to not necessarily address them, but even to apply tactics of divide and rule, for example, and other such methods. But generally speaking, the Iranian opposition has not proven mature enough to mount the sort of resistance that in Iran topples a hated regime. And by default, that means that the Islamic Republic enjoys a longevity that has little to do with whether there's great affection for it in the hearts of Iranian citizens. It has more to do with long-standing patterns of Iranian political behavior.
right, right. Okay, so Ori, if we just go back now and have a look at Gaza, I mean, crikey, when you think of all the wars that are happening around your neck of the woods right now, it's just quite incredible. Anyway, from Israel's initial goals of dismantling Hamas post October the 7th, what has actually been achieved militarily and politically? I mean, has Israel's approach to Gaza shifted over the past 20 months? And if so, does the government even have a coherent endgame for Gaza?
A resounding no to all of your questions. Israel
Oh,
went into Gaza, has not been able to destroy Hamas. By the way, two Israeli soldiers have been killed over the past few days, and even the Israeli press is relating it to the withdrawal of forces from Gaza in an attempt to concentrate on the repercussions of the Iran war. thus making it easier for Hamas to target IDF personnel on the ground
Right.
in Gaza. So
Yeah.
Hamas has not been
Mm,
destroyed, and the hostages have not been
mm,
returned.
mm,
The goals intentionally set by Israel for itself have not been fulfilled. And it's very clear that Israel doesn't have an end game. You can hear very
mm,
contradictory statements from Israelis that, on the one hand, appear to support a genocide, on the other hand, appear to commit to never occupying Gaza. On the third hand, because there are many more than just two hands, Israel wants the Palestinians to take over. Uh, Israel says a lot of things, apparently means very few of them. The only thing that has been consistent in Israeli policy, which is why Israeli policy has not shifted, is the destruction of Gaza. I'm not even talking about whether there's a genocide being performed or not, but Israel is dismantling and annihilating the Gaza Strip. More than 80% of the structures in the Strip are have either been blown up or demolished, and even if they're still standing, they're not inhabitable. So Israel is focusing on making Gaza appear like the face of the moon as much as possible. Many people look at it and say this is part of an intentional plan meant to drive Palestinians away and create a sort of a Lebensraum, sort of a
mm.
living space for Israel
Yeah.
to fulfill settler fantasies about a Jewish empire. That's part of it, but the other part of it is that Israel is simply carrying on momentum. The only thing Israel has managed to do is kill Palestinians with impunity and destroy the Gaza Strip. It's not clear where this is going, and it is intentionally not clear. Netanyahu is intentionally not saying where he wants to lead Israel, which again is quite convenient for most Israelis, as they can address it and consider it simply as trying to solve the problem as effectively as possible. What is the problem, you might ask? According to this reality that I've just described, the problem is the Palestinian presence.
Right. Mm. Okay, so Douglas Murray, he argues that the Gaza war is a moral confrontation between civilization and a death cult, that Hamas is irredeemable and must be destroyed no matter the civilian cost. You've written quite powerfully about Israel's moral failure to recognize the humanity of Palestinians. Ori, how would you respond to Murray's framing that Israeli restraint is already excessive and that Gaza civilians share collective responsibility for Hamas?
That it simply doesn't stand up to reality on the ground. Certainly, anything about Israeli restraint. There's absolutely no Israeli restraint. There hasn't been restraint since October 7th, 2023. Israel unilaterally lifted all the defense mechanisms meant to care, at least provisionally, for bystanders and non combatants in its war with Gaza. That is a well known and established fact. Douglas Murray can argue the contrary till he's blue in the face. There's nothing that can change that reality. As far as the responsibility of the Gazan citizens for Hamas, again, I don't agree. To the best of my understanding, Hamas imposed itself on Gaza, not the other way around. And the notion that we're talking about a death cult, well, I can point Douglas Murray to many people who believe it's the other way around, that Israel
Mm,
is the death cult, that Zionism is the death cult. I don't believe either side is a death cult. I don't believe that that's what we're talking about. I don't believe in unwavering essences of political and ideological movements. I think both sides made political decisions and erred significantly, but I think that after nearly 2 years, Israel is the one that carries the burden of stopping this because no matter how horrible the Hamas massacre on October 7th, 23 was, and it was horrible, it was a national trauma, it was gruesome, it was everything Israel has always
mm,
said it was. Israel has
yeah,
killed tens of thousands directly over the past 2 years and will be responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands in the Gaza Strip. What is happening in the Gaza Strip is not just unconscionable, it is a crime against humanity, and it is a continuous crime against humanity that Israel is perpetrating. So it's not about a competition. It's not about who's right and who's wrong. It's about who's
mm,
responsible. After 2 years, I cannot accept an argument that suggests that Palestinian responsibility for the situation is the only one in existence and that it lasts forever without any kind of expiration date.
You're listening to The Focus with me, Dr. John Bruni, and if you're enjoying this conversation and want to support independent, in-depth analysis on the world's most pressing geopolitical challenges, please consider subscribing to The Focus on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform. Now back to the show. Ari, since October 2023, the West Bank has seen its bloodiest period in decades. Israeli raids, settler violence, and the near collapse of Palestinian Authority legitimacy. Are we witnessing the de facto erosion of the bifurcated Palestinian leadership model where the PA ruled in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza? And if so, what do you think fills that vacuum?
Uh, we certainly are witnessing the erosion of, not just the bifurcated model, which Israel was very much adamantly devoted to, which Israel not just supported, but in many ways initiated. We're seeing the erosion of the Palestinian nationhood. We're seeing the erosion of a Palestinian national identity. Right now, the West Bank is cordoned off, and hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are prevented from earning their keep in Israel and in the Jewish parts of the West Bank. Um, I don't know. What fills this gap is again a political decision on Israel's part that it will allow the Palestinians to decide their fate and will accept Palestinian leadership on the issue of Gaza, but also within the West Bank. Israel, as it currently stands, not only is not in a position to adopt that sort of approach, but doesn't want to adopt that sort of approach. Israel is now ruled by a government with a very strong presence of those who claim that the entire West Bank is Israeli. And
Yeah.
the Israeli military actively supports settler violence, actively supports ethnic cleansing that's being carried out in parts of the territories. Bezalel Smotrich, our Minister of Finance, is also officially the minister in the Ministry of Defense responsible for the West Bank. So this is all being done not just effectively, but with state permission. This is an act of state. The only comfort or minor comfort is that nobody's going to allow Israel to officially annex the territories. Not that that will make Palestinian lives better, it might even make them worse. But Israel's strategy of trying to have its cake and eat it too has not been accepted. The International Court of Justice has deemed the Israeli occupation completely illegal at every level and has ordered Israel already to stop the occupation and even pay Palestinians reparations. It's not going to happen anytime soon.
Mhm.
But the lines have been drawn, I think. Now it's up to the international community to demonstrate its commitment to that order of values to which it claims its allegiance.
How confident are you that that will be the case? We see a similar kind of dynamic in Europe with Russia. We have all these grandiose terms and people use big words to sort of show their support for the Ukrainians, but ultimately it never really comes down to anything other than the words themselves. So, in the Middle East, where passions are far more higher in many ways, do you have confidence that the international community will be able to put more than just words on the table?
There's no real reason to have real confidence in the international community's ability to do that.
Mm.
The international community will do that if it perceives a threat, either coming from Israel or coming from Israel's potential enemies. I think Israel is approaching that line. Again, I
Right.
don't think the international community will immediately ostracize or shun or sanction Israel, but Israel is doing everything within its power to distance itself from the international community, to make it clear to international leaders that it doesn't care, that it will exclusively set and establish its own rules and act exclusively by those rules. Once the international community perceives that this is, a threat to its well-being and to its integrity, then the international community will act. The logic is somewhat different. Trump is concerned with the distinction between winners and losers. The reason Trump distanced himself from Israel before Israel attacked Iran, and one of the reasons why Israel attacked Iran, is because Trump looked at Netanyahu and saw a loser.
Yeah.
Israel did not accomplish any of its predefined war goals. And Trump is not interested in hanging around with losers. But the war with Iran is looking to change that, perhaps. In any case, I don't have a lot of confidence in anybody, but I think it's important to frame the situation in these terms because it's really important to drive home the point that Israel is not responding to an emergency or to a threat to its very existence. Nobody can threaten Israel's very existence, not Iran, not its Arab neighbors, not anybody. In fact, most of them have fully recognized Israel in everything but name. So I think, you know, giving a name to what Israel is doing is remarkably important at this time,
Mm.
without placing any real confidence in any kind of sea change occurring sometime soon.
Well, of course, there are two sides to every story. The other side is with the Palestinian Authority itself. It's been widely viewed as ineffective, and its leader Mahmoud Abbas faces mounting internal and external pressures. So, what a viable alternative leadership can emerge from the West Bank? I mean, is there a third force Israel or the international community should be engaging with?
Well, Israel has no interest in engaging with such a third force, even if it does exist, because Israel is interested in a weak Palestinian Authority, and Abbas, like it or not, is beholden to Israel, if not, umbilically tied to Israel, dependent on Israel for everything he does. And definitely, he's both corrupt and ineffective, but that is, again, a result very much of Israel's influence and Israel's authority over his leadership. Is there a third force? There probably is, but most of them are in Israeli jails, and Israel would have to um, pull a Frederick de Klerk move and release those potential leaders for the third option to come to life. Other than that, most Palestinian options at the moment are either beholden to Israel or involved in a deathly war against Israel.
Ori, the public protests worldwide with regard to Gaza, from Washington to Jakarta, have reframed the narrative, especially among the youth in the developed world, as well as that of the global South. I mean, is Israel losing the global legitimacy it once had post-Holocaust and post-Oslo? And how much does this actually matter strategically?
I think Israel's already lost any kind of pretense to a global legitimacy. Certainly, the numbers, even from the United States, demonstrate that younger generations have completely abandoned the Israeli cause. The blind support for Israel is now the domain of Jewish organizations led by older Jews across the world. And even they are not fully supportive of what's happening in Israel. Is it important strategically? Yes, it is, very much so. Israel is dependent on the goodwill of the world. Despite
Hmm.
the bluster that we are hearing right now, Israel cannot go it alone, cannot defend itself as it wants to be defended alone, and generally is dependent on the world for everything from investment to defense equipment. If Israel becomes a liability to the next generation of global leaders, in the global south, certainly, but also in the global north, then Israel will find itself not just devoid of that impunity it once enjoyed, but approached with suspicion and generally tossed aside to ensure stability both regionally and globally.
There's another thing that comes out of all of this, of course, and that is that sort of nexus between Russia, Iran, and China. There's a very large Russian expat community within Israel, and so that there are relatively good relations between the Israelis and the Russians. On the other side, you've got relatively good relations with China as well, and yet both of them are supportive of Iran. So how does, at the high level strategic thinking, how does this all pan out, do you think?
Russia, Iran, and China have so far talked the talk, but they are very far from walking the walk. All three have expressed severe condemnations of Israel,
Mm.
but they don't see themselves as necessarily equipped or desiring of entering the fray in the Middle East. China has a lot of economic benefits to reap from remaining on the sidelines. Russia is shunned and a pariah anyway, and even if it
Mm.
does invest in the Middle East, it will be limited in its ability to do so. And Iran is friends with both, but at the moment, Iran is well, otherwise engaged, let's call it that. So certainly that's there, but I don't think it represents an immediate threat or an immediate locus for change in the world as we see it now.
Okay. So, okay, I'm onto something slightly lighter. I'm not sure, but anyway, let's see how this goes. What was the whole Greta Thunberg Freedom Flotilla about? I mean, everyone knew that the IDF would never let Thunberg fulfill her mission. Was it just a giant publicity stunt? And do these sorts of public relations exercises do anything to assist Palestinians in need?
They don't get aid to Palestinians in need, or not necessarily, but I don't think it's a stunt. I think it's very important to draw attention to the uh, ridiculous nature of Israel's oppression of Gaza. I mean,
Mm,
exactly because the flotilla or the ship was not a threat to Israel in any way. Israel could have just as well chosen to accept it graciously, take the people on board ashore in Israel, provide them with safe flights home, and then document how the aid they brought was being delivered in Gaza through Israeli hands. But
mm,
Israel is not there at all. Israel wants to show its might. That's the only thing Israel has left. So in that sense, I don't think it was a stunt. I think Greta Thunberg and her friends showed exactly what they wanted to show. I think it wasn't about delivering a ton of aid to the Palestinians. It was about calling Israel out and clocking Israel's response and generally demonstrating to the world how limited Israel is in its capacity for adaptation and an energetic response on the spot. Israel did exactly what everybody knew it would do. And as far as I'm concerned, the images of Israeli naval commandos in balaclavas and rifles drawn surrounding Greta Thunberg and her friends, they make Greta Thunberg and her friends look better than the Israeli commandos look.
All right. Well, swinging the conversation back to my part of the world, Australia, we have recently sanctioned Israeli ministers Ben-Gvir and Smotrich for their roles in inciting violence and undermining the rule of law in the West Bank. Alex Rivchin of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry criticised the move, arguing it unfairly targets a democratic ally and shifts focus away from what he calls the real obstacle to peace: Palestinian violence and rejectionism. But if the West is willing to sanction Hamas for terror, why shouldn't it also censure Israeli elected officials whose rhetoric and policies escalate conflict? In your view, Ori, do such sanctions challenge the ideological forces eroding Israeli democracy, or are they simply symbolic and too little, too late?
I think they're mostly symbolic, and they're very much driven by the attempt to distinguish between good Israelis and bad Israelis, making Smotrich and Ben-Gvir out to be bad Israelis. It's true, these two are agents of chaos, and they're certainly exacerbating conditions. They're responsible for a lot of violence, and they play an instrumental part in the deterioration of Israeli society. But the real truth is that Israeli society, Israeli Jewish society, almost in its entirety, supported Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza. And Pretending to draw a line that separates good Israelis from bad Israelis makes life easy for the countries that sanction Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, but it does not deal with the true, I don't know if I want to call it change, but the true dynamic that has taken Israel over the past 2 years, that has brought to the forefront the quiet parts, that has substituted the id for the superego.
Yeah.
Smotrich and Ben-Gvir play a very significant part in that process, but it isn't their process, just like it isn't Netanyahu who's driving Israel to do what it's doing. The Israeli public, again, might protest Netanyahu for weeks on end, against Netanyahu for weeks on end, but ultimately that same Israeli public will report for service in Gaza. I've called up for such service and will perform the war crimes that are facts of life in Gaza at the moment. As far as Iran goes, the general atmosphere of jubilation is that much greater. So, looking at Israeli society and saying, well, no, the moderate center has been hijacked by extreme politicians. I don't believe that's the case, which makes these sanctions important but mostly symbolic.
Ori, Israel says Hamas cannot govern post-war Gaza, yet it refuses to let the Palestinian Authority back in. So with no credible alternative in sight, as we mentioned previously, who should govern Gaza the day after? Can any international Arab or hybrid administration realistically stabilize the place?
Oh, a lot of people can stabilize the place. This all has to do with Israel's political decision to allow this to happen. And if you buy my argument, the one I've been making over our conversation, that Israel is interested more in a forever war and in unlimited discretion of for its violent operations than anything else, well, then Israel has absolutely no interest in allowing any kind of stabilizing force to enter Gaza.
Yeah.
And I think Israel is demonstrating that that is what Israel wants, or that that is Israel's commitment at the moment, because Israel is not allowing the war in Gaza to end anytime soon.
Okay, finally, if Netanyahu has now cut the head off the Iranian snake, how will average Israelis see him? As a war hero who sacrificed his reputation and that of his country to prevent an Iranian nuclear genocide, or as a reckless gambler who rolled the dice only to have sparked a regional war or a bloody state collapse?
I just read an interesting Facebook post in Hebrew where the man who posted it said, you people have to realize that this war against Iran is the purpose of Zionism on the one hand, and that we must oppose this horrible government on the other, but not right now. Right now, we have a war to win.
Right.
I think that describes the broad Israeli consensus. A lot of people don't like Netanyahu. A lot of people don't trust Netanyahu. He won't be seen as a war hero. But having made the decision to strike Iran is taken by most Israelis very favorably. Again, indicating that what would we do without Netanyahu? Netanyahu is our quintessential prime minister. This is the leader we need, and so on. I don't know that all of them are going to vote for him come next elections, but he will have postponed the elections now with this war in Iran. A lot it depends on the outcome of where where this is going, what sort of what sort of agreement Iran might choose to sign, and what sort of conditions Israel might press on Iran and the United States, and of course on American development. But right now, Netanyahu is seen as, I don't know if heroic is the word, but enough of a leader to do the right thing despite not being liked and not being appreciated. So I wouldn't go to either of the extremes. It's not as a war hero or as a bloody tyrant. I will say that he has rehabilitated himself to a great extent with the decision to embark on this war, because, again, the great majority of Israelis see it as not just right and proper, but right and proper right now.
Ori, thanks for being with us and for sharing your insights on the focus.
My pleasure as always. It was an honor to be here.
Thank you. Understanding Iran's leadership requires more than policy analysis. It demands a deep engagement with ideology, history, and belief. As we've just heard today, without this lens, we risk misreading both the threat and the possibilities for change. From Israel, that was Dr. Ori Goldberg. Thank you for joining me, John Bruni, for today's episode with Ori Goldberg. Check out the links in our show notes to learn more about Ori and connect with him on social media. Now on to questions for the audience. Do you believe Iran's leadership would ever actually use a nuclear weapon, or is the threat more about deterrence and regional influence? How much should ideology and religious belief factor into how we assess a state's strategic behavior, especially in the Middle East? Can Israel's military actions against Iran be justified as global security measures, or are they exacerbating regional instability? Let us know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's a free way to support us. You can also subscribe to the podcast on the Ozcast Network, iTunes, and Spotify, where we'd appreciate your 5-star reviews. Do you have comments or questions about the podcast? Post them into the comments section on YouTube, and I'll do my best to respond to as many as I can. My thanks as ever to the producer of The Focus, Neil Smart. Please stay connected with us on social media. Follow me on X at Bruni Doctor, and follow The Focus on X at TheFocus_Sage. And don't forget Blue Sky on thefocuspodadl.bsky.social. From Adelaide, South Australia, you've been listening to The Focus.